Josh McKenty, a Canadian geek who has seen the light and embraced the world of sales. Welcome to the Sales Podcast. How the heck are you?
Doing very well. Really glad to be here. Thanks, Wes.
Man, I knew you were smart when you got into sales. So, just a kindred spirit. You always say, like, I'm a little bit of a closet geek, I'm a little tech background, but I mean, I got into sales as quick as I could, man. So like what was your journey? I mean, I was reading some of your background with Netscape, all those youngins listening, that's like a browser. It's kind of like Safari or Chrome, maybe Microsoft Edge, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a little bit.
But old.
NASA. How does a Canadian work at NASA? What the heck, man?
I mean, there's two sides to that story. One is I'm a dual citizen, right? So born in Canada, but I have a U.S. passport, and that helped a lot. Like, it's really hard to get a government agency job without the proper creds. And the other is this is the same as in sales, right? When you're a special resource, when you are the only person in the world who does that one thing, people will come to you. And so it's not that I'm like a rocket scientist, but when NASA wanted to get into cloud, there were not a ton of cloud people.
So what was that one thing? So when was this? Like 20 years ago?
Oh, no. NASA was 2007, 2008 is sort of when I started there. I was there just for a couple of years. And I actually started writing software when I was 6, and I started selling when I was 7. So, they were really always the two sides of my personality. And I was excited about software, not just for the sake of like, ooh, I want to like sit in front of a computer all day, but because I was excited about what it could do and how people could interact with it. And I saw it as this kind of like, this big shift in the world. And I wanted to go out and tell people about it. So that back and forth of like, I was always kind of the evangelist or the field engineer, or like I would go and meet with the customer, be like, I bet we could build this for you. What do you want us to do? And so even when I was, building and running larger software teams, I always wanted to get in front of the customers and be like, do you like this? Does it work? Is it what you need? What else do you want us to do? And that naturally turns into kind of talking about how we're really solving their problem, which is the backbone of sales, right? The way I've done it, that sort of high touch, strategic, trusted advisor selling.
Writing software at 6. I was using a magnifying glass to burn ants when I was 6, and 16 and 26. I think I did it last week too. But I mean, but just looking at the 6. So what the heck? How does that happen?
Right place, right time, lucky and unlucky. I was a really sickly child. So I was not super into sports at a young age, although I did kind of recover later on. And my mom was part of that revolution of like knew how to type and got early into using a computer for desktop publishing. So this was 83. These were kind of the first personal computers. And there was one in the house, and I wanted to learn how to make it do what I wanted to do. And if you were going to use a computer, you were really going to learn much more those days than you would today. Like even just how to turn a computer on and get it running the program you wanted felt a lot more like really being a programmer than it does today.
Yeah. I remember, golly. So I can do my math. So I'm 7 years older than you. So yeah, 83. Good grief. Yeah. I mean, I was in Houston. We started using a computer, I think my senior year in high school. One of my best friends. So we were all in advanced classes, but his last name was SA and I'm SC. Right. So like, day one of class, you sit in alphabetical order. So we became buds, played sports together, but he came from money. He had it was an Apple IIe back then, I think. Right. So he would do a little bit, help me a little bit with some schoolwork. We had computer programming, I think our senior year. I hated it. I went to the Air Force Academy. We were the second class to be issued computers. 1988, IBMs. We had the dual floppy. So the true floppy and then the smaller disk.
Yep.
They,
Yep.
they're not, are they still called floppies?
They
or
were still
what?
called floppies, which was dumb. They were you had 5 1/4 and then 3 1/2, and the 3 1/2
Yes.
were the hard floppies. Yeah.
Yes. And I hated it. I hated it. Like now I love them, but it's like,
Yeah.
man, early on I hated it. I remember we had to take computer programming as a freshman, and it just didn't click. I just, and it's so crazy because now like I create marketing and sales automation pipe, funnels and campaigns, and you got to think through the logic. And early on, going back 2008, there wasn't all drag and drop. Man, I had all these nested windows because you want to build an email, but you want to tag them, but the tag isn't made. You got to create that tag. You got the if then logic. You got to build that. You got to, because holy crap, man, this was before Facebook groups and chat support. So if you weren't done by Friday at 5 p.m., suck it. You got to wait till Monday to get some support. And
didn't happen.
Man, our computer science teacher, I remember he was a cool dude. And if you went to see him for support, right? Like if you just didn't give up, he would basically pass you. But he would literally just write our homework. You go see him, I'm like, I don't get it. He could just tell, like, there's no lights on it. He would just type it out and give you the disc back. I'm like, oh, thank you, sir.
Right.
Oh my gosh. So yeah. So for you to be doing this in 83, I mean, that's amazing.
It's really weird. It's almost easier when you start that young, right?
Oh,
like
for sure.
I got to high school and started doing algebra, and I was like, oh, this is just programming. Like I already know how to do variables. I already know how to do variable assignment. Like X is my friend. I've been friends with X since like I was 6 years old.
Yes.
I learned to type and learn to spell at the same time.
Yes.
Right? So using a keyboard just feels supernatural to me. It's funny, I was in Civil Air Patrol briefly when I was 12 and 13, which, I never went for the sort of true Air Force pass, but I was in California. And same, even then it was like, there were computers there. They were ever present. Nobody liked them. They're sort of a necessary evil.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of sales folks feel the same way about sales operations, right? Like it's a necessary evil. And when I first started using CRM systems, I just remember everybody hated having to put data in. It was like the burden of like the big brothers watching you. And you're like, I don't have time to be putting in everything I did on the account. I just want to work the account. And I was like, no, we can't help you. It's a team sport. The rest of the team can't play if we don't know what play you're running.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it never gets explained. So like I embraced technology early on in sales. I always tell people the story when I was selling mobile homes in Mobile, Alabama, and had 2 kids, 2 under 2, hell, 2 under 1. Technically, the boys are 360 days apart.
Wow.
And if you entered your prospects into the database, because back then, I mean, it was just like a dumb terminal going back to the headquarters, because they wanted to follow up with them, and but if you enter them in the database, if they came back later and bought, even from another sales rep, you got half the credit for entering them. And if you didn't enter them, you got nothing.
Right.
So I'm like, and so I took typing, like my second semester, my senior year in high school, I took typing as an elective. I knew I was going to the academy. I knew they were giving us computers. So I was like, I better learn how to type. So like even now when I do these interviews, I'm taking notes, on the blog post. So when it's done, it's done. I'll clean it up a little bit. I'll do some interlinking to some relevant episodes. So I get some, some internal SEO juice.
Yeah.
But it takes 10 minutes maybe. And, I do the intro and outro. And I mean, like this, I'll publish this one, tonight or tomorrow morning.
Nice.
So just get it done. Right. Yeah. But so I've always, because it can cut both ways. Sometimes it is Big Brother, riding your butt. But if Big Brother's writing the checks and Big Brother wants that info, all right, if that's how we're going to play, if those are the rules of engagement, fine.
Yeah.
So I've always, like, I'll hit mute. I'm typing away, taking notes. So what, but I teach that still to this day. I'll take your words and I'll put it in the proposal. I'll put
Yes.
it in future emails. And of
Yes.
course, you're going to be nodding and love what I'm saying because I'm just repeating back what you told me.
Yep. Yep. 100%. And you can go above and beyond just like, oh, I'm parroting back what they said. I'm like, I took that back to the team. We really dug into like what problem are you really struggling with? Here's solutions that 3 of our other customers have come up with. We'll tailor this proposal not just to say what you said you needed help with, but actually a detailed plan where we're bringing additional expertise, and that, like, we Pivotal, I was there for almost 5 years. We did a lot of like formal CTC, change the conversation selling, and that notion of like, we're going to understand our customers' problems better than they do, and we're going to bring them outside expertise from the rest of their industry. Say, look, this is the problem you're really struggling with. This is how our solution is a part of what you need to do, and here's a plan for the rest of it, and then let's work that plan together.
Man, I don't know if I'm excited or bummed out. I just learned something new. CTC selling. I've been through all these things. I've never heard of CT. What is? Did y'all make that up, or is that something
No,
I've just missed?
it's a formal methodology.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's that popular outside of enterprise software sales,
Okay.
right? Because very complex deals, very large deals tend to be really long sales cycle. Like we're talking, 9 to 18 months.
Sure.
And the change the conversation framing is really to say, probably your prospect has showed up with problem X that's actually a symptom of problem Y. And so you
Sure.
go from being perceived as a point solution to being a trusted advisor.
Yep.
And then you're shifting to how do we execute this larger campaign together, as opposed to here's my widget, thank you very much, I'll go away.
Yeah.
And our business was so driven because it was subscription, right? This is enterprise sales shifted entirely to being subscription revenue. When I started, it was like, we sell you a box and we're done. Perpetual license. Maybe we get a maintenance contract.
Here's your $1 million DVD.
Exactly.
Don't scratch it.
So we didn't even really care if they deployed it. Like, it doesn't matter. Shelfware was totally fine because we got our check. Whereas when you go to subscription, you're winning the business over again every month, every quarter, every year. And they're not going to renew and they're not going to re-up unless they got value out of it. And usually there's so many people involved inside your customer, you have to not only know that they got value and help them get value, but help them prove they got value. So you're quantifying it. You're going back to them and saying, here's how many containers you deployed. Here's how much time you save for every member of your operations team. Here's the number of security incidents you had last year versus this year. This is the reduction we've helped you achieve. Here's your footprint. Like, all of these things we said were going to be value, then we show you that you achieve that value and project how much more value you're going to get in the next year and so on. Yeah. It's really, it also gets really personal, right? Because your buyer, they have their own plan. They're like, hey, I'm trying to make SVP, or man, I really want to get on the speaking circuit, or I have these efficiencies to hit. It's my KPI. I'd love to get my bonuses this year, but unless we can hit these efficiencies, it's not going to happen. So it becomes very personal. Your champion is winning on the basis of that relationship.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's like you hear the saying, it's nothing personal, it's just business. I'm like, bullshit. All business is personal.
100%. Yeah.
A human being is signing that PO. A human being is signing that check.
Yeah.
A human being is authorizing that wire transfer. And yes, and somebody wants to see this project succeed. Somebody else wants to see it fail.
Yeah.
For personal reasons.
Yep. Yeah.
You got to figure it out. And I'm eating my own dog food. I'm updating my sales stuff. I gave it a name finally, the IDSS training, internal dialogue selling system.
I saw that. Love it.
Thank you very much. It's brand new.
I had a nickname at Pivotal. I called it the ABCs because it was a consensus sell, and the 3 personas were the application owner, the business owner, and the CIO. I was like, you get those 3 people in the room, you get them to agree on the value that this program is going to deliver for all 3 of them, and we have a deal. If you
Yep.
can't get all 3 of them participating, it never close. Maybe we get a little point win. Maybe we sell you a couple of seats of something or other, but it doesn't become programmatic. It's not a real change.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, you remember, the ABCs from Glengarry Glen Ross,
totally, always be closing.
right? So I changed that years ago, and I came up with acronyms like always be courteous, always be
Yes.
curious,
Yeah.
always be concise. Like quit talking over them. So many so many little things you can put in there, because it's like when you know the history of ABC, always be closing, it's literally our grandfather's technique.
Yeah.
David Mamet experienced that like in the 60s
Yeah.
from guys who were 30 and 40 years old in the 60s. So literally our grandparents.
Second prize is a set of steak knives. Both of my parents sold vacuum cleaners door to door when I
Yeah.
was a baby, right? And I remember going to sales demos where they literally would have a bag of dirt and pour it out on the rug in front of the customer and then vacuum it up. And they'd have the bright lamps and show how much dust was coming out of the air and all that, like just old school block and tackle.
Yeah. And it worked. It still works to a
Yeah.
degree, the door to door. Oh, it's tougher now. We were just talking with somebody. It's like when we were kids, somebody rang the doorbell, you ran to the door. Hey, who is it? Because it's probably a friend coming over.
So exciting.
Now it's like the doorbell rings. I'm sitting here. I'm like, I don't even get up. I'll just scream at the kids. Who's at the door? Like,
my kids don't ring doorbells. They just text their friend that they're outside, right?
Exactly. I know that's where we've gotten to. So things have changed, but I mean, human nature doesn't change.
Yeah.
Change the conversation, control the inner dialogue, and your own, because I came up with that because just thinking like, what are we telling ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
What is a prospect telling themselves?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, most of the stuff we tell ourselves is negative, it's self-defeating, so it's like, how can we change that internal dialogue? I've always told people, like, I have flashcards and things like that and scripts. And it's like, I don't give it to them to make them robots. I give it to them just to help in the beginning.
Yeah.
When they're new and they can kind of have a playbook. But then it's like, ultimately, I just want them to have the intestinal fortitude, right? And the psychology to just stay in the fight.
Yeah.
Because just stay at it, do the right things. Good things are going to happen, but it may take a while. Sometimes it may take a while, but stay in the fight.
We used to, we do training every quarter, right? Go to the QBRs. And because I had a global role, so I traveled every other week, and I would go to one of our sales offices every quarter and do like a bunch of one-on-one sessions with a bunch of the account executives, and then sort of group format. And we would do on stage stuff, just pack it all in. But you're right. It's still the same fundamentals of like, you've got to understand what challenges your prospect is dealing with. You have to be honest with them and yourself about how you can help and if you can help. And then you just got to drive the details, right? Keep showing up.
Yeah.
That operational process, I know you've done a lot of work around CRM. You were in CRM early, and I've seen CRM at scale in so many ugly, messy ways. And the details matter. Like, deals die in the details. So we think about, like, if you've gotten to yes, somewhere in the conversation, there's a possible yes here, right? You've run your process, it's BANT or it's Medic or it's MedPick or whatever you're doing. You're like, I know who's buying, why they're buying, I know when and how much. And then you've got, okay, now you're going through discounting, now you're going through legal, now you're going through the details of delivery, when and where, right? And whether this is a physical good that's getting shipped, or whether this is a digital good that there's some onboarding and there's some integration work, or there's a services component, where's that getting delivered and how many people and what are they getting you? Often, especially in my role, they're like, hey, well, you're going to come and be part of this, right? You're going to be the executive sponsor of the relationship. Does that mean you're showing up for onboarding? And so you get overcommitment of executive resource, all these details. And at some point in every complex deal, people abandon the CRM and it goes into a spreadsheet. Because it has to anyway, right? The quoting tool is always a spreadsheet. The customer portal that you may or may not really have access to, especially if it's a long-term account, you're getting exports from that as Excel formatted files. You're getting your PO is going to be a workbook. The invoice is going to be a workbook. Like, and all this, like we have all this ERP tooling and it all turns into spreadsheets at some edge, right? And then you've got your Monday meetings. And in theory, it's just a report coming out of CRM and you're supposed to sit down and just walk through deals in forecast. And in practice, somebody has turned it into a spreadsheet every time.
Dude, I know. I've seen it forever. I was brought in 2007 when Dell deployed Salesforce.com.
Mm-hmm.
Spent 10 months there training all 3,000 of their North American salespeople, and then helping create the onboarding training for new hires.
Yeah.
And even back then, and I bet still to this day, I mean, their core program was a DOS system. 2007, so they were multi-billion dollars even then.
Yeah.
And so they're probably at their core, probably still running that DOS system in Microsoft Excel.
It's somewhat like, so I was there. Pivotal was owned by Michael Dell, right? And we were part of the roll up when EMC and Dell and VMware and Pivotal and half a dozen other companies all became like big Dell. At the time, the largest software roll up ever done. And so there was a whole bunch of harmonization of tools and processes on the back end and like what's happening for quoting and what's happening for CRM. And so there are parts of it that got better just because they're like, this deal doesn't make sense unless these efficiencies actually come through, especially on the field. But there's pockets in and amongst there where it's still, really good, really talented, really hardworking finance teams flipping Excel spreadsheets around right before the end of the quarter and going, okay, this is everybody's, it's like, okay, there's the number the CRM says we're going to hit. And then there's the most likely, and then there's the management call, and then there's the sandbagged one you gave to the board, right? And so you've got really like the number you're calling for the quarter is like 5 numbers, 6 numbers, depending on how many steps in the hierarchy. And everybody's number changes every week.
Oh yeah.
So
I know. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's what led you into delving, huh?
Yeah. That was
why the name?
I mean, it's funny, like delving into data was sort of the original challenge, right? And there were a bunch of things happening at once. There was we had done a lot of work around data science, and data science was adjacent to a lot of the digital transformation work I was doing. So we're saying, hey, we've done this thing with apps. We're doing this thing with e-commerce. We've done this thing with DevOps and operations. Data has kind of gotten left in the corner, and we don't really know how to grapple with it because nobody understands what's going on. And then there was all this self-service BI tooling that was coming in. Tableau was huge in one corner and Sigma was coming in the other corner. And I was like, why is none of this working? Why isn't data-driven decision-making actually working? We did some crazy stuff at Pivotal. We were tracking every touch, right? We huge field team, 800 people. I mean, it's not huge by Dell standards, but still for like a small company, it was a lot of field force. And we had every meeting, every phone call, every email in Tableau. And we could say these kinds of activities in the playbook contribute to deal value going up. These ones are a waste of time. Let's stop doing those. We're really trying to get that level of insight in planning. But most organizations couldn't get that far. And we're like, why can't you get, and they're like, oh, well, there's data here and it comes out in a spreadsheet. There's data there and it comes out in a spreadsheet. I was like, it sounds like your problem is always, we have a pile of spreadsheets and we're trying to get understanding out of it. And so I was like, okay, let's delve into that. And that was always the conversation. Can we delve into that? And I was like, okay, well, there's a name there that makes sense. But it was also just this idea that what makes this hard is that it's changing all the time. And we don't know how to grapple with change, right? So that was the original insight. And then COVID happened, the pandemic happened, and, the Suez Canal happened.
Mm.
and the global supply chain collapsed. And everyone said, okay, we've got to do nearshoring, we've got to do onshoring, we got to do multi-shoring. We're going to buy every part we need from more than one vendor, and we're going to move every date and every delivery location from one place at one time to 5 places at 5 times. So we saw this, like, the worst case right now is in auto, because it takes something like 30,000 suppliers to make one car.
Mm.
If you look at Ford making an F-150, there's like the economies of several countries tied up in that manufacturing process. So then you think about what's the complexity on those POs on the back end, right? Well, there's spreadsheets being emailed back and forth, and they're the vendors logging into Ford's customer portal and saying, okay, what's the change from last week on what we're supposed to ship to where, by when, for which part numbers. And if you get that wrong, the line stops, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your liability, your downside on that is not the dollar value of the order, it's the cost of stopping the line. So I did a lot of work with the global industrial champions at Pivotal, with the Boeings and the Air Forces and so forth, and the Lockheed Martins. And they like, there's equal tension on the quality of what you're building and the speed that you build it and the cost of building it, and getting visibility into those pipelines. It's spreadsheets all the way down. It's maddening.
Yeah.
So the dates and dollars and discounts and details in the quoting, in the purchase orders, in the Monday meetings, these are the kind of boring details that, like, no sales rep really wants to talk about. And most great sales managers used to be great reps, right? So all of a sudden their job is mostly spreadsheets, and they're going, well, how do we make this make sense? So there's this huge gap that folks like you jump into, like, what can we do with CRM? What can we do with the productivity team? And then this bucket that's left over is just spreadsheets. It was just making me crazy.
So it's a case of, like, I guess just make do. It's like face reality, right? In a utopian world, the CRM and ERP and blah 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 all just talk with one another. Everything's digital. Everything is seamless. You have beautiful pie charts and bar charts, and everybody knows they're singing from the same sheet of music, the same playbook. But that ain't going to happen. So, all right,
Yep.
let's just go. The rubber meets the road. Let's make Excel better.
Yeah. Let's just make it better to use it. We're going to keep using Excel, right? There's 800 million people that use Excel at least once a month. And that number continues to go up no matter what else we do. No matter how big Tableau gets, no matter how big Google Sheets gets, no matter how much we push back into HubSpot or Salesforce, the number of people doing smart stuff on the edge with Excel is always growing. So yeah, we're just pragmatic about it. We're like, if it's going to be in Excel, let's at least keep track of what changed. Let's make it really easy to pull a change report on that. We got 10,000 line purchase orders for individual parts and components. We're like, okay, reading that by hand, we're going to mess it up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the big driver. And it's also, the spreadsheet ends up being the thing that's passed back and forth all the way from, the field engineer through the rep to the manager to the VP level. And it's a thing that's getting actually turned into PowerPoint slides for the board.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want some sense of traceability. And especially, sorry, I'm just ranting now, but when it goes into design and you're like, we got to make this look good. This is going into the quote. We're going to put it in front of the customer on Tuesday. Where's the design team? The productivity team is going to make this spreadsheet look great. Just make sure they didn't change any of the numbers, right? Who's doing that sign off? So then you talk to folks like McKinsey and they're like, oh, we build processes for large organizations doing this. And they're like, McKinsey has hundreds of people at every tier who do nothing but check spreadsheets.
Mm-hmm.
Because if somebody's like fat fingered a formula in there, or they just they copy pasted values, and so they've baked a number in, or they had a hidden sheet that they forgot about that's now in the customer's hands, and that was all of their discounting and pricing information. Like, we had 5 versions of this quote and we don't really know which one was which, and so we've lost track of which one we're supposed to send. that stuff, it's not just embarrassing, you know, it kills trust with your customer, which is like, yeah, maybe it doesn't kill the one deal, but it shrinks your relationship over time.
Yeah. So, I mean, you kind of had a background in this, but like walk me through. I love kind of the origin story. Like, did you just pound some Red Bulls and code this out, version A? Did you sub it out? Did you hire like overseas developers and kind of wireframe it and say, go build this? Did you get a partner? Did you get funding? Like how they
Yeah, I
go
mean,
from idea to like getting somebody to
I
pay for it?
I had an amazing team at Pivotal when I left, and then Pivotal got reacquired by VMware. The mission shifted and changed a bunch, and so there were some great people who were like, "Hey, can we work with you again?" And I was like, "Okay, let's do a thing. Let's pull a team together. Here's the idea I'm really excited about." So the team came together mostly from folks I've worked with before, and this is where I geek out a bit. The reason nobody had dealt with this problem is because it's actually stupidly hard in a really boring way, right? So if you look at the origin stories of like Google and a bunch of these big tech companies, you're like, why was Google a great search engine and the 17 search engines before it weren't? Well, because actually indexing the entire internet well is hard. Why is delving a great way to compare spreadsheets when beforehand, well, you've got Spreadsheet Compare by Microsoft Excel, which only runs on Windows and it misses half of the changes we'll detect, and it doesn't really deal with multiple versions. And that's because comparing two spreadsheets is really hard. It's like weirdly hard because you can move a bunch of rows, you can add rows, you can delete rows, you can change the contents of cells, and you can move columns at the same time. And so what we would think of as like, oh, we're just detecting changes. It works like, track changes in Word. Track changes for Excel doesn't give you that. It doesn't give you a simple summarization of like, here's what changed. They added these 2 dates, they changed the quantities for this order, and they added these 5 parts on this other order, right? Or like, here's what changed in the forecast. This one deal's dropped out into the next quarter, and this other deal's shrunk by $100 million. That's what you need. That's what you need for making decisions. The math to do that and do it fast and do it on, 10,000 rows or 100,000 rows in some of these big documents, nobody had built that.
Mhm.
So we spent a full year basically working out, and we hired a PhD in mathematics. We had a team of coders, all local. This was not a thing where it was like, I can just hire some offshore developers and hand them this problem, you know. So we did a bunch of hard math work on like, how do we actually know for sure that we caught every change? And then we started building out, just iterating with early customers, like, how do you want to see it? Do you want to see it in the web? Do you want to be able to download a report of the changes? Do you want to get an email when there's a new version? Where do you want your comments? Do you want to use a plugin inside Excel? Do you want to just upload things?
Well,
We went
how
through a
did
lot
you
of those
how
iterations.
did you fund all that? I mean, it's nice that people want to keep working with you, but you
Oh
got
yeah,
to pay 'em.
I raised some money from some venture capitalists. I mean, I've done this enough times now, right? I've built and sold a couple of tech companies, and so um, I have great investors in the Pacific Northwest with Fuse Venture Capital and Founders Co-op, and then also a bunch of angels I've worked with before, and uh, they funded us actually when it was just a team and a pitch deck. We're like, here's what we think we're going to build, and they're like, okay, you're credible. We get the market, we get the problem, we experience it ourselves. Ironically, VCs use a ton of spreadsheets, right? So they're like, oh yeah, we
Yeah,
have spreadsheets that cause us pain as well. So
right.
they could really relate to the problem we were trying to solve. Um,
So in other words, have a good track record and don't burn any bridges.
yeah, which is basically the same as being in sales, right? Yeah, raising money is almost exactly like a tough sales campaign. It's like somebody gave you a really big patch, and you have to build all of your own pipeline to start with, and then close everything in 1 quarter. That's
Yeah,
basically a fundraising round.
yeah, that's cool though. I mean, you have those relationships. I mean, leverage them, and
Yeah, yeah,
and some people will listen to this like, I don't have those relationships. That's not my world.
yeah,
And some will listen to this. Oh, well, this podcast doesn't apply to me. It's like the hell it doesn't. Prove yourself where you are,
yeah.
and that can be the genesis of the next thing you go for, because you've got a proven track record.
Absolutely. And I mean, the takeaway here applies to every deal ever, which is like, to the extent that there are boring details in the deal somewhere, if you leave them to be your customer's problem, you're leaving a ton of value on the table.
Yeah.
One, you're not taking your role responsibly. Your job is to make your customer's life easier, and getting on top of those details is part of how you do that. Right? So,
yeah. I'm always telling people that, not only do you have to solve your customer's problem, really you have to solve your customer's problem.
yes.
If you can make them look good to their customers, they're going to come to you. But then you got to solve your boss's problem. You have to not be a problem for your boss.
Yep.
So the internal sales, and I guess it's one of the reasons like I always did well in companies, selling mobile homes. The office manager, she kind of ran things, right? We had the general manager, and of course he's the buck stopped there, but he gave everything to Becky. Everything ran through Becky.
Yeah.
Becky knew where all the bodies were buried. Becky could get a body buried.
Yeah.
Becky could create a body that needed burying. So it's like, be nice to Becky, and she's this, Southern belle, so I was like, 28, 29. She was late 40s, probably. She had boys a little bit younger than me in the early 20s, and they were a freaking empire. They had land, they had mobile home lots, but she's this slow talking, Virginia Slim smoking, nice Becky. But I showed up, I worked hard, I had a family to feed. And when deals came in, leads came in, Becky gave them to me.
Right.
Because she knew I would treat them right.
Yep.
Fast forward a few years, I'm out here in California selling tech to hospitals and healthcare systems. And I would show up early and just be nice to the executive assistant.
Yeah.
I'm getting all the inside scoop. Is the CIO in a good mood? Is the IT director in a good mood? What are their projects? Are they on time? So just by being nice.
Yeah.
And ABC, always be curious, always be courteous, always be concise. I didn't show up and just blab. Like, hey, how's it going? How are you? And things happen, but
if you're going to do challenge selling, I love doing challenge selling. I love showing up and being like, hey, I think you could do more. You could go bigger. And here's how I think that would look. But you have to be right, and you have to have a track record, and you've got to still be humble about it. You're like, 100%, I'm never going to know more about your business than you do, but I'm always going to try and bring fresh perspective and outsider's perspective and understanding of your industry, bigger trends. I was covering Gap at one point, and Gap was having a rough time, right? Like they were down every quarter, not just in the market, but in like total revenue, they were dropping, which is not a position you ever want to be in as a retailer. And so I showed up, and it was an internal conference to technology sponsored by the CIO, and they thought their job was about technology. And I was like, you're the backbone of Gap. Your job is to make revenue happen. Let's talk about revenue. Here's the trend. Here's QRM. Here's where Gap is losing. You're losing to Zara. You're losing to fast fashion. Here's why. Here's how that ties to technology. So you, as my customer, I'm helping you understand your boss and what your boss is asking you to do. And I know you feel like it's impossible, but it's not, because we're working with other customers who are doing better than you. And I'm like, I'm not picking on you. You're starting from an impossible position, but it is possible to do better. And let's talk about what's challenging about what I just said. What do you disagree with? And now let's turn that into the plan.
Yeah.
And that made a huge, but it was nuts and bolts for them. They're like, we can't work on X because all of our time is spent on Y. I was like, okay, so the highest value I can bring is to help you automate Y. Right? It's not about your e-commerce. We're not going to go do better on e-commerce. We're going to have to, we have to spend less of our time putting out fires.
Yeah. Yeah. And things always cut both ways. I mean, on one hand, like I made a blog post years ago that I keep updating, it's saying that basically your BHAG, your big, hairy, audacious goal
Yep.
is sabotaging you, because sometimes I think people, their
Mhm.
goal is too big and maybe they don't believe in it. And so they just kind of meander because they're like, we'll never get there, but conversely, but when you don't, what is it? Like my people suffer for lack of a vision,
Mhm.
I think it's the Old Testament. It's like Kennedy, right? Let's go to the moon.
Yeah.
Okay, that's big,
Yep.
so whatever these minor issues are, fix them.
Yeah.
Fix them.
Yeah.
Because you got to solve 10,000 little problems to fix the big problem. And we're fixing the big problem.
Yeah.
So fix it. Yeah. So
There are no
uh,
magic bullets, but there are bullets. And so it's like that's the thing. You're going into combat. Like, yeah, you could do it hand to hand, but like if you have a gun, load the gun. And so a lot of this, you can have a big audacious goal. I love bags. But like I joined Pivotal, we had sold 3 Cloud Foundry deals ever. Right. I got there in the fourth quarter and they were trying to hit the number for the quarter. We're like, okay, well, we're behind for the year. We're gonna make it up. Let's go do that. I was like, okay, we made it through Q4, and then we got into planning. Bill Cook gave us the number for Cloud Foundry. He's like, we're gonna do 52 million this year. I was like, we're gonna go from doing 3 deals ever to $50 million. And so James Waters wrote it on the board. He's like, $1 million a week. He's like, we're gonna go and do $1 million a week for the year on average. I was like, all right, I'm just gonna get on a plane every week. Point me somewhere. We'll just go figure this out. And we went loaded, and every week at the end of the week we go, okay, what did we learn? How do we load the gun? What are we going to take away from this week to go back? The sense of timing of like, you can't just wait to the end of the quarter to take lessons learned, right? You sold for a week. What'd you learn? Take that into the next week. So that pace of change, that the market was going that fast. We had to adapt and go that fast. We blew our number out. Like we beat our numbers every year, but it was that sense of like, let's treat it 1 week at a time and not 1 quarter at a time or 1 year at a time. Really helped.
So like, what was driving those guys? Were they just dreaming? Was the board squeezing them? And they're like, I got to do this or I'm going to get fired. I mean, things worked out. So like, were they just visionaries? They just knew like their time had come and like, let's go hit it. Cause that's an exponential jump.
Yeah. No, I think the market opportunity was so big. It was like the knee of the curve was evident, right? Like we had Paul Maritz as our CEO. And so he had been, he'd been early at Microsoft, he'd been the CEO of VMware. He like had vision. And he was very clear that like, look, those first 3 customers, here is the value they are getting. It is enormous. We can go help other customers capture that value.
Yeah.
And so a lot of like years 3 and 4, we took our early winners and we ran the table on their industries, right? So we're like, hey, we got Allstate. Let's go get every other big insurance company. We'll just help them do the same things Allstate are doing. We got Home Depot. Let's go do every big retailer, right? Yeah. We got Air Force. Let's go do all of the branches of the military. Let's go get Marine Corps. Let's go get Army. Let's go. And so we did a lot of that rinse and repeat. That really drove scale because the early there were visionaries in every industry at that moment in time. JP Morgan Chase was incredibly visionary in what they wanted to do with us. And when JPMC says, hey, we're doing this, and they'll get on stage at our conference and talk about it, then it becomes really easy to go and talk to the rest of the banks and be like, hey, JPMC has got 50,000 containers running on Cloud Foundry. Like, maybe you should consider doing some of this.
Yeah. But it's good to pull the blinders off. I tell the story like when I was learning how to golf, like my dad got me golf lessons when I was 23. I don't know if he loves me or hates me. And man, I was hooked, right? I was single and I'm like, it's a challenge. Like I'm going to, I started jujitsu 6 years ago at almost 47. And it's like, still go 6 days a week. It's like, some little dude was just wearing my ass out. And I'm like, okay, this should not be why, this defies the laws of physics. I should whoop this old man's ass. So I'm like, So I was reading, right, Golf Digest, Golf Magazine, and getting lessons. And I'm a big guy, 6'2", 230. And, reading these golf for the average golfer, 5'10", whatever, 170 pounds.
Yeah.
They're like, you're going to hit a 7-iron 150 yards.
Right.
So I'm hitting a 7-iron and I can't get it 150 yards. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with me? Right. Because I think subconsciously we know what tools we have and what we can do with them. So I was easing off on the club because it was too much club. I'm, 30% larger than the average person that they're talking about.
Right.
So just out of frustration, like I grabbed my 8-iron and just smacked it. It's like poof, and I flew it. I'm like, maybe I can do it with a 9-iron. Right. So then I realized, all right, so I'm somewhere between, an easy 8, a hard 9 is my 150-yard club. So by doing what everyone else was doing, I couldn't even do what everybody else was doing.
Right. It doesn't fit.
Right. So maybe these guys see that because those first, like launching the space shuttle or pushing your car, right, runs out of gas. You push. Once it gets going, it's like it gets a lot easier. So those first 3, were probably just okay. We're moving. Yeah. And I always say you can't steer a parked car. So
true. So true. And you also, our learning loop got faster, right? We were focused on learning every week. Our customers were learning faster. And as we had more customers, we could learn from patterns. So we're like, hey, here's everything that's happening in France right now. Here's all of our customers in France. Here's how that's different than what's going on in Germany. Let's take those lessons, right? I went to Japan 2 times a year for the 3 or 4 years I was there. Yahoo Japan was a huge account for us, and they'd been a big account for me previously. And everyone in Japan wanted to copy what they were doing because they're the tastemaker in that space. They go faster, they go earlier, they go harder. So you find those early visionaries, and the rest of the field just wants to copy what they're doing. They can or can't, but they'll die trying.
Yeah. That's cool. So who should check out Delving?
Sales managers for sure. If you have a Monday meeting and you're using a spreadsheet, you could go check this out. If you review other people's quotes and you're trying to make sure they didn't play with the discount, they're dropping their shorts without getting sign off, like you should be using Delving to check those spreadsheets. If you're logging into a customer portal and you're on sales operations side, or you're an account executive and you're pulling down some spreadsheet version of the change to the PO, you should definitely be using Delving for that. Like, it's all over the sales operations landscape, but sales ops is not somebody else's job. It's everybody's job, right? So just don't get caught with your pants down.
Very nice. All right. It's just delving.com, right?
Delving.com. Wes, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah, man, this was cool. I'm glad your team reached out, and we will go live with this very soon. So I appreciate you sharing your words of wisdom.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
All right, Josh, not Joshua, although Joshua, but to his friends, it's Josh. Thanks for coming on the show, man. It's been great.
Thank you. Cheers.